Hi, I'm Kim Eddleston with Entrepreneur and Innovation Exchange and FamilyBusiness.org. It's a pleasure to be here today with two of the most acclaimed researchers in the women's entrepreneurship space. I'm here with Professor Linda Edelman, who is the chair of the management department at Bentley University. And I'm also here with Professor Candida, who is the vice provost of global entrepreneurship leadership at Babson College. Linda and Candy are also the authors of two new books. One is Women's Entrepreneurship and High Growth Businesses, and the other is Entrepreneurial Ecosystems and the Growth of Women's Entrepreneurship. Thank you very much. So what we're going to be talking about is some of the issues we have with attracting more women in our entrepreneurship programs, what we can be doing to hopefully attract more women into our entrepreneurship programs, and then why women should hopefully take our entrepreneurship courses. So let's start with the first question. Why don't we see equal representation of women in entrepreneur programs?
Kim, that's a tough one. It really is. Bentley has a relatively small entrepreneurship program, but it's amazing to me. It never ceases to amaze me. When you look at the entry course, the beginning course, the gateway course into the program, it's about 50-50. So we really see a lot of women. They're interested in entrepreneurship. They have that spark to go take the class. But something happens, and we get down to the ones who then really want to dive down deep, they're really serious about starting a business. And maybe out of 30 students, we've got 3 or 4. So really the numbers drop way off. And I'll tell you, I don't know why. I really don't. I have some ideas, but I don't know why.
And the problem you're seeing is very common across different universities.
Right, I don't think it's our problem.
No.
I think this is everyone's problem.
Yeah, and even, teaching entrepreneurship, I've taught classes where I haven't had one woman, or maybe it was, 3 or 5 women in a class of, 30 men. So, it's an issue that hopefully we can help address today and even give some tips for schools that are trying to attract more women.
Absolutely.
Now, what about your experience?
Well, so of course, Babson College, it's required. Everybody has to take entrepreneurship whether they want to or not. So 100% of our students, grad and undergrad, take entrepreneurship courses. So they come to Babson because they want some entrepreneurial learning. But to Linda's point, as they get further on in the program, we see some attrition. And so we have fewer women in the concentrations, fewer women that are participating in business plan competitions and so forth. Around the world, there's probably 5,000 schools that offer entrepreneurship courses. And out of those, most of the schools offer entrepreneurship as an elective. And so back to what Linda was saying is that students self-select into those courses. And so the question of why they're not there, there's actually not been a lot of research on it. I do know of 2 people that have done some work in this area. And one of the things that they found was that the motivations for why men take entrepreneurship courses and why women take entrepreneurship courses is different. So the men tend to take it because they want to be an entrepreneur and they want to learn everything there is about being an entrepreneur. Whereas the women take the courses because they want to learn skills and capabilities and develop a network. So you have different kinds of motivations. And so if we go back and think about how those courses are framed, right, and what the course descriptions are and what they think they're going to get out of it, there's some differences there as well. I have some suggestions on that down the road. But to add to that, if we think about the sort of stereotypical successful entrepreneur, it's usually going to be a guy. I have an exercise where I'll ask people, I'll walk into a room and I'll say, name a successful entrepreneur, and Linda's seen me do this. And you usually get to the 7th or 8th name before you get a female name. And so when you think of the successful entrepreneur, no matter who you are, the image that you get is a masculine image, the heroic risk taker, somebody who's independent, somebody who's going to start a business, raise a lot of money, and go public. So that image is not what women see, and so there's a little bit of a gap.
I wonder if it doesn't go to motivations too.
It
You
does.
remember back in the day we wrote a paper on the women's growth motivations.
Yes.
So
yes.
men, we saw they wanted money, right? That was by far the motivation for guys. We're going to get rich. But women, they wanted autonomy, they wanted wealth creation was one of them, but there were a whole bunch of other things that women were interested in when they had their own business. And I wonder if some of that self-selection doesn't have to do with Maybe it's that wealth-driven for guys, and it's those other things, and women maybe they get those pieces in other places. I'm not really sure.
So since it seems we tend to have a better chance of getting them in more the introductory courses, and maybe one solution is having it as a required course, entrepreneurship, but since we do tend to see them in the earlier courses, what do you think some of the reasons are that they do drop out? Like they don't stay with it or end up minoring in it or majoring in it?
Well,
Is there something we're doing?
I don't think it's us. And I suppose that's easy, right? That's easy to say it's not us. But I have to say again at Bentley, I asked the question, I said, do you have women who come into the classroom? Do you have those women role models? Because I think the idea of seeing someone doing what you're going to do is so important. And the answer was yes, they did. And then I asked, well, what about businesses? Are we seeing businesses that women might want to go in? So it's a bunch of businesses that are sort of traditionally male businesses. Thought maybe that's the self-selection. And again, no, across the spectrum, from real estate to all different kinds of businesses. So I said, okay. So I think it might come from the family. If we see a parent who's a successful businesswoman, I think the odds are so much higher that you're going to see a daughter who wants to do that. Don't you see that kind of thing in family business?
Well, it is true in a family business, if there's a current female as a CEO, the chances are significantly more likely that the successor will also be a female CEO versus if the male is a CEO. So you're correct.
We saw the same thing in that other data that we had. If there was a woman who was a women board member or women on the top management team, then the odds of having a woman successor were much higher. So I think we're really mirroring in entrepreneurship what we see in other spots, in other domains.
Yeah, the role modeling I think is really critical. And actually, if you look at the availability of teaching materials, I did a little survey 2 years ago where I looked at all the cases that had female, tried to identify what percentage of the total cases in the case center had female protagonists, and it was around 10, 12%. And so that means that the teaching resources are limited. In fact, you can take a look at entrepreneurship textbooks. How many of those cases are about women or maybe minority women entrepreneurs? Let's look at even further because we've got the intersectionality piece. And so the teaching materials is one thing, but I think there's also something else too, and I think it goes to language. And so when I was department chair at Babson, I used to look at course descriptions. And if you look at how courses are described, and so some of the language of course descriptions for entrepreneurship is different. It's about, are you ready to take risks? Are you ready to be competitive? Are you ready to win? So the language is really more sort of masculine oriented, and that could be a reason why female students select out, because they see the language and say, that's not me, right? That's somebody else. And so, yeah, so how we as educators describe our courses, we need to think about sort of gender appealing language for both genders, because you don't want to have a course that's, maybe so feminine that you don't have any men in it. I mean, depending on what you're teaching, but you want to have sort of a balance. And so you want to reflect what you're going to teach, but not go too overboard with the sort of stereotype of the heroic entrepreneur.
So I've even noticed that using the word innovation or innovative will keep women away versus the word creative. Like, I've done experiments with teaching executive women, asking them, how many of you are innovative? And maybe only a few raise their hand. And then you ask them, how many of you are creative? And every hand. They can actually say, I love to knit, I love to cook, and they can actually articulate how they're creative when it's basically almost the same meaning, connotation, it's just two different words. So some of the ways maybe we could attract more women in our courses, we should look at how they're described, the course material, make sure, it sounds like, whoever's teaching your courses is very mindful of trying to get women to come in and speak. The cases is a big one.
Well, we can write them. As
Yes,
educators,
yes.
That's
We
a
can
call
do
for
that.
action.
Yes, we can.
That's a call for action. So why should women take entrepreneurship, even if they're not sure if they want to even be a small business owner or an entrepreneur?
Oh, that's an easy one. It's the thinking. It's all about how you approach problems. It's about how you go and how you see the world and how you interact with the world. I mean, having that ability to tackle problems and to tackle situations even in an entrepreneurial way, to bring in disparate information from different sources, to look at the world instead of one way, to look at it slightly differently. Those are all the things that entrepreneurship does for you. Those are invaluable skills. They're not limited to starting a business. Those are skills you use in every single part of your life, from a corporate job to everything. So no, I actually think that every school should have some sort of required, sort of that lateral thinking, horizontal thinking, that thinking that's a little bit different, that helps people approach problems differently. I think it would revolutionize education. I really do, and I realize that's a big, strong statement there, but no, absolutely, it's so important, and it's just, we don't do a good job. At least many institutions don't do a good job with that.
Yeah, so and again, I agree with what Linda just said, because the lateral thinking kind of comes from the humanities and the arts and sciences, and so sort of bringing some of that into entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial thinking, if you will, is something that could really help all entrepreneurs. So for women too, I think, and this goes back to the earlier point about what are the objectives with which women approach entrepreneurial classes. And so entrepreneurial thinking, or entrepreneurship, if you will, is a way of solving problems. And so problems that have great social and economic sort of implications. And so if we think of some of the social problems that we have, and there's plenty of them, entrepreneurship is a lever, it's a mechanism, it's a methodology for solving those problems. And so women who care about more than just economic value, this is something that they can leverage to solve some of the problems that they really care about.
So I have to ask, if you had tips for other universities, colleges who are trying to attract more women into entrepreneurship and their ecosystem, what advice would you give?
Well, as chair of our department, I think the first thing I need to do is go back and look at our syllabi and course descriptions. So I hadn't ever thought of doing that, to be very honest. But I think, and I think actually schools do a good job with this, and that is just that inclusivity, and making sure that women do feel comfortable. But there might be, so often entrepreneurship courses are housed in a department. So they might, in our case, are housed in the management department. So there might be a role for the chair and assistant chair, someone to really go in and talk to some of those students and say, hey, do you know the benefits of these things? Do you know what you can get out of a concentration or a major or however it's set up? There might be an easy, one night where you bring in a couple of women entrepreneurs and have just a little informal, meet and greet kind of thing. We do this often in other areas. Why not do it in entrepreneurship as well? And target some of those, in our case, it would be management students. So I think there's a lot of, these are small, these are easy little things. And you can even, mirror those with career services and sort of have them work with you. And you might be able to run some events that just would attract and let people know, let women know that, this is a viable career. This is a spot you could really be, and you could be really successful in this career.
So what advice would you have? You're in a very fortunate situation, but think of the small school who maybe they're even trying to get entrepreneurship on their curriculum. Someone in the management department's trying to sell it, right? What's your advice?
Well, I think the first thing, and you hinted at this, Linda, is that entrepreneurship is not just about starting a business. Entrepreneurial thinking is something you can apply in lots of different situations. And so you have to dispel this sort of myth that to be an entrepreneur, you have to go out and start something and you have to invent something. Because you don't. You can buy a business, you can work in a family business, you can work in a corporate setting. And so those skills travel across lots of different contexts, and the entry point can be different. It doesn't have to be starting something, you scratch your head, you come up with $1 million idea, and then you go raise venture capital, and then you're set for life. It doesn't really work that way, except for a very small percentage of people. So that's the first thing, is that you've got to think of entrepreneurial thinking more broadly. And then for your school, and this gets back to what you were saying, Linda, is that entrepreneurship or the entrepreneurial courses could be housed in a lot of different places. So leverage whatever that is. If your entrepreneurial courses are in the engineering school, or if they're in hospitality, leverage those things to draw students in. If it's engineering, you're going to draw women students into engineering generally. And by the way, here's entrepreneurial thinking that can be an add-on or something that you can benefit from. Or if you're in a hospitality school or a music school, you can leverage those other parts of your school. So that's kind of what I would do if I were thinking about that more broadly. And one other thing too, Entrepreneurial learning happens not only in the classroom, it happens outside the classroom as well. And so there's co-curricular activities, and there's clubs, and there's all these other opportunities. And so at other schools, if you're thinking about building a program, you can build it through a club. You can start there, right? Or you can have a dorm where students who are entrepreneurs can live together. So there's lots of different ways to have your female students be involved in entrepreneurial activities, and it does not have to be just a classroom.
Excellent. Thank you so very, very much. Again, I'm Kim Eddleston with Entrepreneur and Innovation Exchange and FamilyBusiness.org. It's been a pleasure being here today with Professors Candida Brush and Linda Edelman. Thank you.